On the first official day of summer 2025, the movie Jaws turned 50 years old. Let's look at the movie that changed everything. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 17, Chapter 4.
Jaws.
June 20th, 1975, a Friday. The weekend plans for millions of North Americans included a visit to the local movie house to catch the much-hyped film that we'd already heard so much about, Jaws. As one critic put it, Jaws came out 50 years ago, and we never got over it. It's aged well, in my opinion, despite the ancient special effects, that awkward mechanical shark, the oh-so-70s striped sports jacket that the mayor of Amity wore when he assured the people that the water was safe. Spoiler alert, it wasn't safe. Not safe at all. As a matter of fact, later that summer, I was out swimming, got out a little too far, and suddenly an eerie feeling surrounded me. I don't know how, but I knew that danger lurked. The Jaws theme started to play in my head. I panicked, started swimming toward the shore with all my might, finally wading onto the beach out of breath, turning back to look over the water of Lake Winnipeg, a freshwater lake in Manitoba. Yeah, Larry, there's no sharks in there. Well, yeah, says you. Better to be safe than sorry. I thought I saw something. The Jaws theme would inexplicably enter my brain, even in the hotel pool, or sometimes when I was in my bathtub.
Jaws. See it before you go swimming.
The movie Jaws was based on the 1974 best-selling novel of the same name by Peter Benchley. Benchley did have a travel memoir published 10 years earlier called Time and a Ticket. From there, he worked as a reporter for the Washington Post, an editor at Newsweek, and as a speechwriter for President Lyndon Johnson. After Lyndon decided not to throw his Johnson into the ring for a second term, Benchley knocked around at various jobs, and by the early 1970s decided to take one last shot at being a writer. He'd always been fascinated by a story he had read in the paper in 1964 about a fisherman tracking a massive great white shark off the coast of Long Island. Through previous publishing contacts, he received an advance of $1,000 to submit an outline for a book based on that story. The 100 pages were greenlit and eventually became the novel Jaws, best-selling beach read of 1974. Before the book was even published, Universal Studios already saw its movie potential. They paid Benchley $175,000 for the film rights, and an extra $25,000 for Benchley to write the screenplay, which he did co-write. Benchley also has a cameo in the movie as the television reporter covering the shark story. The man that Benchley co-wrote the screenplay with is Carl Gottlieb. He also has a cameo as the mayor's assistant. It is now well known that the main difference between the book and the movie was that in the book there's a huge marital tension between Police Chief Brody, Roy Scheider's character, and his wife Ellen. In the book, Ellen ends up having an affair with the oceanographer, Matt Hooper, played in the movie by Richard Dreyfuss. That storyline was left out of the film to concentrate more on the shark hunt. Which reminds me, in the book, Matt Hooper is killed when he goes underwater in that shark cage. In the movie, we all know the character resurfaces at the end to paddle to shore with Chief Brody. Chief Brody, with one amazing rifle shot picking off the canister stuck in the shark's mouth, causing it to explode, is not how the shark dies in the book. That was a motion picture moment. There's also a common misconception that Jaws was Steven Spielberg's first studio film. It was not. Famously, at age 19, Spielberg, a film school dropout, snuck onto the lot at Universal and set himself up in a vacant office, pretending to be an employee. Eventually, he got executives to view a short film he had made, and that was enough for them to sign him to a small contract. Spielberg first directed a TV episode of Rod Serling's Night Gallery, kind of a sequel to his Twilight Zone series, and then episodes of such TV shows as Marcus Welby, Columbo, and Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law. If any of those come up at late-night TV as reruns, they're worth the watch. Even in his young 20s, he was already putting this Spielberg touch on anything he directed. In 1971, he directed a made-for-TV movie called Duel, starring Dennis Weaver. Weaver as a traveling salesman being pursued relentlessly by a killer 18-wheeler. Still a riveting watch. The TV movie did so well, Universal recut it and released it in theaters in Europe as a feature film. Today in North America, it still runs as a full-length film on classic movie channels. That success led to Spielberg being offered Sugarland Express, starring Goldie Hawn. Sugarland Express, 1974, was his first full-length theater release. Critics praised the young director and Goldie Hawn's performance, but otherwise the movie got mixed reviews. Spielberg was not the first choice to direct Jaws. Remember, this was already a hot property at Universal. They had paid dearly for the rights. And since the book had become a bestseller, the pressure to make a hit was on. Director John Sturges was considered. Dick Richard, a director who was also impressively transitioning from TV, was offered the job and turned it down. Eventually, they considered Spielberg's work on Duel and Sugarland Express, and ultimately it was impressive enough that he was asked to direct the movie. And it's always fun to hear who was up for the roles of main characters in what are now classic movies. Today, it's hard to imagine anyone else playing those roles, but of course, there is always a casting process. Roy Scheider was not the first choice for Chief Brody. Spielberg wanted Robert Duvall, or perhaps even Charlton Heston. The part of Quint, the gruff boat captain, was first offered to Lee Marvin and Sterling Hayden. Both took a pass. It was the producers who suggested Robert Shaw. Spielberg has since openly said that Richard Dreyfuss was far from his first choice for oceanographer Matt Hooper. At the top of the director's list was John Voight, who turned it down. Joel Grey, Kevin Kline, Timothy Bottoms, Jan Michael Vincent, even Jeff Bridges were all considered for that role. Spielberg began to lean toward Dreyfuss after some convincing from his friend George Lucas, who had used Dreyfuss about a year earlier in American Graffiti. Oddly, after Lucas convinced his friend Steven that Dreyfuss was the guy, Dreyfuss turned down the role. Twice, saying that it was a movie he'd rather sit and watch than have to shoot. Dreyfuss has gone on record of saying that after that, he had watched a movie that he had done called The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, and he hated his own performance so bad that he ended up calling Spielberg and begging for the role. Hard to imagine Lee Marvin on a boat with Robert Duvall and Jeff Bridges chasing a shark. I think that would still be a good movie, just, different. Jaws went into production on May 2nd, 1974, with a budget of about $4 million. The movie was shot at Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, and on the ocean. Jaws was the first feature film to have most of its key scenes shot at sea. This was part of the reason that the budget quickly ballooned to $9 million. Quite simply, it's the ocean. It's not the most cooperative actor on the set. Everybody else is well prepared, but then the ocean does whatever the ocean wants to do. Shooting on water automatically has its own set of problems and expenses. Also running up the cost were these 3 huge mechanical sharks. None of them actually worked properly, and certainly didn't seem to work well in water. Water, where sharks are usually found. Ultimately, according to many film buffs, this actually improved the final product. Because many of the clunky mechanical shark shots were unusable, it forced Spielberg to get more inventive and create the fear and tension by other means that did not include an obviously fake shark. So the movie ended up leaving more to our imagination. The only big scene that the special effects people have is when the shark climbs onto the boat to eat Captain Quint. And though comparatively ineffective as a special effect, I think today it still adds a charm to the film. Here's another nugget of information to impress your friends. The film crew called the shark Bruce, apparently after Bruce Raymer, who was Spielberg's lawyer. With all the troubles at sea, the ballooning budget, studio executives starting to wonder if they should have bet it all on some young, inexperienced director, Spielberg believed that his career was over. Somehow they plodded on, because they had to. $9 million later, well over budget and over schedule, they had a movie.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless, eating machine. It is as if God created the devil and gave him Jaws.
Jaws took in $260 million that summer on its initial release. It went on to take on almost $500 million, which, when adjusted for inflation, would be well over $2 billion. The Jaws franchise took in over $800 million in its time, which is almost $20 billion in today's purchasing power. And the franchise, well, that included Jaws 2 in 1978. Roy Scheider returned as Chief Brody, Lorraine Gary as his wife Ellen, and Murray Hamilton as the Amity mayor. Behind the scenes, Carl Gottlieb returned to write the screenplay. The scenario of Jaws 2, well, there's a new hotel at Amity, so new business and new tourists and a new shark. Spielberg was actually on board to direct the sequel, but he was busy making another movie. Universal didn't want to wait that long for his schedule to open up, so they went with another director. The movie Spielberg was working on was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with Richard Dreyfuss. Had they waited, not only would they get Spielberg, there's a good chance Dreyfuss would be in the sequel. 1983 saw Jaws 3D, not in Amity, but at SeaWorld in Florida, where Dennis Quaid plays the chief engineer, Michael Brody, who gets a visit from his younger brother, Sean. Michael and Sean were Roy Scheider's kids in the original Jaws. It's Florida, but again, they have shark problems. 1987, Jaws: The Revenge, the fourth and final film. They're back in Amity at least for a while, and Jaws 4 seemed to ignore most of the plot points from the previous Florida SeaWorld movie. Michael Caine is in this movie. I'm sure Jaws 4 is at the top of his film resume. I was in Jaws 4. In this movie, I think the shark rents a Ford Escort, follows them around town, stalking them. I can't remember. It was pretty ridiculous. And if ever a movie could officially rubber stamp the end of a franchise, it was Jaws: The Revenge. The only reason it's even a thing for me is that the late, great comedian Richard Jeni does about 10 minutes on how stupid Jaws 4 is. If you YouTube search Richard Jeni, Tonight Show, Jaws: Revenge, it's a great piece, worth to watch, lots of laughs. What those weaker sequels could not do, not even a great white shark could do, was kill our love for the original 1975 movie that, as I said, still plays well to this day. Another thing Jaws did was elevate the importance of the film score. John Williams. John Williams was already an Oscar-nominated film composer. If I play the Jaws theme here anywhere on the podcast, it'll likely be blocked for copyright infringement on most platforms. But the thing about the Jaws theme is, I don't even have to play it, do I? We all know it. Just any of us making the sound. Da-da, 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 da-da. Well, that is just synonymous with impending doom. The tension and mood that Williams creates just with the music. It's incredible. Williams went on to score Star Wars, Superman, E.T., Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, so many others. Williams, still active, still with us, at age 93. Da-da, 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 da-da. Incidentally, the unfortunate Skinny Dipper at the beginning of the movie, the character has a name. It's Chrissy Watkins. She was played by Susan Backlinie, who was not an actress, but was a swimmer model spotted in a magazine by one of the producers. The scene at the beginning where she is in the water, thrashed about by the great white, she actually has ropes attached to her limbs that are being pulled side to side by up to 10 men. Because that's how you did special effects in the old days. Susan Backlinie. Eventually she became an accountant and lived on a boat until her passing in May of 2024 at age 77. What else is fun to remember about Jaws? Well, there was the famous feud between Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw. Dreyfuss was apparently a bit snotty and ill-mannered. Shaw was drinking a lot, and they clashed. It somehow resolved itself just enough to get the film finished. But much of that tension between the two characters was real. Shaw died of a heart attack in 1978. But those who were still around kind of laugh about the feud now. Another fun fact is that in the 1970s, Spielberg really wanted to direct a James Bond movie. You know when Hooper and Brody open up that tiger shark and a car license plate falls out of the stomach? The plate says Louisiana 73, which was the setting for the Bond movie Live and Let Die. The first 3 letters of the license plate are 007. Jaws, like The Godfather and, When Harry Met Sally, Gone with the Wind, so many more, it has one of the most quoted lines in it. You're going to need a bigger boat. That was not in the original script. It was improvised at a get-together the night before the shoot.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
There's also a myth that Jaws had one of the widest releases in Universal's history. In fact, according to movie historians, it opened in 409 theaters in the U.S. and 55 in Canada. That was considered a moderate release. Some movies opened up in over 1,000 theaters all at once, especially if it was kind of a B-grade film. Producers knew it wouldn't last, so they wanted to flood the market and make as much money as they could before word got out about how bad the movie was. Here, the legendary studio head, Lew Wasserman, knew they had a quality film. So he said, let's limit the release, let the word get out, create more demand, and then start to release it to more theaters. The strategy worked, $260 million worth. This is why some will say Jaws changed cinema forever. After Jaws, enter the blockbuster era, especially the summer blockbuster. After Jaws, if a movie wasn't a blockbuster, it was considered a failure at worst, and maybe an art house hit at best. That's partly true. Others will argue that before Jaws, The Exorcist was a blockbuster. The Godfather before that. George Lucas claims 1939's Gone with the Wind was the first real summer blockbuster. I guess. I can see both sides of this discussion. But in its way, Jaws did bring in a new era of movies. Incidentally, top movies of 1975 other than Jaws: Dog Day Afternoon, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Nashville, Barry Lyndon, 3 Days of the Condor, The Sunshine Boys, Rollerball, Shampoo, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Jaws won 3 Oscars: Best Film Editing, Best Sound Editing, and Best Original Score for John Williams. They should have won for Best Original Scare, except that wasn't the category.
See it before you go swimming.
Cuckoo's Nest won Best Picture that year. 50 years later, that movie can still make us jump out of our seats. Millions are still afraid to go into the water, a fear of sharks. To this day, a shark attack becomes the lead story on the news. Discovery Channel runs an annual Shark Week. They name sports franchises after sharks. There's a show called Shark Tank that's not even about fish. The term jump the shark is part of our vernacular. Refers to a thing that lost the very qualities that made it appeal to us in the first place. From the show Happy Days, where Fonzie, in his leather jacket no less, water ski jumps over a shark. Shark, the world's most dangerous animal. And how do we know that?
Jaws.
The movie not only inspired its own sequels, but an entire genre, a series of Sharknado films, not to mention Megalodon, the mega movies. That was a shark so huge, there was not a boat big enough to kill it. I suppose somehow we could even blame Jaws for the popularity of the Baby Shark song and dance.
Baby shark, do-do-do-do, baby shark.
That is its own killing machine, an evil earworm for parents worldwide. In the day, Fidel Castro said Jaws was a metaphor for capitalism. Others said it was a metaphor for Watergate. In either of those, I'm not sure which one the shark is and who's the victim, who's the hunter. I don't know. You know, metaphors, they can be very confusing. A metaphor is a great white shark, always swimming, always feeding. Lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eyes. Powerful, potentially deadly. You know, we don't mind them if they're just part of the balance of nature, taking their role in the food chain. But then they eat the humans and they become the enemy. And then, what was my point? I don't remember. Jaws. Happy 50th, Jaws. Still one of my faves. There's a real dichotomy here because it's a thing that I love, but it also frightens the hell out of me. Not many things I can say that about. Well, there was Ruby Jensen, first girl I had a crush on in high school. Oh, look, there comes Ruby. Da-da, da-da, na-da, 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 dee-dee-dee.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.